Rise of a Dungeon House, City of Masks, Book 2, by John Stovall. Narrated by Brian Wiggins. Chapter 1. The Gentle Voyage. Excerpt from the journal of David Thomas Toledo IV, called Leviathan, recorded year 600 after Cataclysm, month of the Dying Light, day 26. I couldn't stare long at the horrific form of Felgoth. His evil was clearly reflected in his physical form, and it made me think. I'd come to make a deal. And I did make one. I'd assumed that once the Oblivion Dragon was bonded to the dungeon, it would serve like all boss monsters. But will it? Or will it be so strong and so evil that it can influence James even when bonded? I often worry if I'm making a huge mistake, but I'm too far along to back out now. I will give James the power and hope that he has the will to resist Felgoth. The deal itself was easy, but I do question why it was so easy. James lay in bed reading a book. For once, it wasn't his granddad's journal, but rather Anna's copy of the Canticles of Light. His grandfather had mentioned a powerful abomination could be the boss of James's dungeon, but James knew little about the horrific Felgoth. As he read, James tried to picture the hideous beast. The Canticles of Light contained some insight. The mortal champions of the light were assembled. God King Yutha of Igbo, God King Besta of Yoruwa, God King Manka of the Isa, and the Archmage Ephraim. Their armies, numbering over 10,000, many leveled from their wars with the Spawn, were arrayed behind them. They had come to put down the abomination Felgoth, the terror the Dark had used to plague their lands. When it dropped from the skies to land in front of the armies outside the city of Visthe, all quailed and many ran screaming. Its horrible visage alone, half alive, half dead, terrified all who could see it. Surely a being such as this could not be slain by mere mortals. As it landed, a wave of its power went out, and the magic itself coiled away from Felgoth and ceased to answer the call of the great champions arrayed to fight the abomination. Then Felgoth lived up to his moniker, the Oblivion Dragon, and began to consume. And his name was very well given, for everything that faced him that day did suffer the fate of oblivion. James shuddered and closed the book, then reached under his pillow to touch the knife he'd left there. It comforted him, despite its uselessness against anything like Felgoth. How can I possibly make something that powerful my dungeon boss? It could squish everything like a bug. Why, Granddad, did you send me on this path? But that was the path James was now on. He had to sail to another continent, find an abomination, convince it to serve in his dungeon, and then bring it back to the city of Norhelm, his home. Then he would make a dungeon there with Felgoth as his boss monster and use the resulting power to take vengeance on all those who had wronged him, and finish Granddad's work to rid the world of an evil he still didn't have a name for. No big deal. James lay back in bed next to Flea, who was already snoring. He stretched out, his 6'3" frame putting his feet a good 6 inches off the end of the bed. This was the largest room on their ship, the captain's quarters, but it was still tiny compared to James's room at his family estate. No big deal, he thought again sardonically. This is certainly a great starter adventure for a level 6 teenager, right? After that sarcastic thought, sleep finally claimed James. James woke to the sound of his sister, Isabel, screaming. His hand immediately went for the knife under his pillow, but in his grogginess he missed and ran his arm along the blade. James takes 1 damage. Arm is bleeding. James will suffer 1 additional damage over the next minute.